Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is David. Today we are going to continue our restaurant project. In the previous session, we have finalized this hero section and also the navigation, the header, the top bar. So in today's session, we are going to continue our project. After we building this about section and the why section, we are ready to build one of the most important sections for this project, which is the menu section. If you haven't got a chance to watch my previous video, please go back to session 1 to watch how we started the entire project. Alright, so for the menu section, let's firstly have a look at the original project. The menu section contains one is the filter. So when the user click on the filter, it allows the user to approach different category of the food. And also, under the menu list, each one has been wrapped in a menu item. The user is allowed to click on one of those and get to the individual page of that menu food. Alright, so this is what we're going to do. And also the user is allowed to go back to the home page and find their menu as well. Okay, so the filter and also the data mapping, we have to create a backend API endpoint which is going to list all of the menu food data, and then the user going to make a GET request from the backend API. Once the fetch data, the data going to be mapped into this UI component, which is going to be the list item. And then I'm going to show you how to build a dynamic routes to handle each individual menu item. Alright, so that's what we're going to do. So open up your code editor. So we are now on the page.tsx, and now we are going to continue by building the third section component. So in the section folder, we're going to create a file, and we're going to call it the menu.tsx. So enter, and also very quickly we're going to create a file called a menu.css. Enter. So now we have that, and then RFC to create a boilerplate, and then we have to import that /menu.css. We're going to have to import that CSS file into this component file, so these two are linked together. And then to think about how do we build this menu section, the section itself is just going to be quite simple because it's just going to be in a container that wraps the filter and also the menu list. However, this menu list item, each individual one, is supposed to be an isolated component. So we need to create a separate component for each menu item, and then we're going to do the data fetching. We're going to build the backend API, do the data fetching, and then the data mapping. Alright, so that's the process. So the first thing, after we've done a structure for the section component, in the component folder, we're going to create a component called the menu item to hold each individual menu item, and .tsx. Yep, and then in the component, quickly menu item.css that. So now we have this one, RFC, to create a boilerplate, and then very quickly I'm going to import the /menu item.css. So to get these two files combined, so eventually this is going to be the child component, the menu item, and then once we've done that, we're going to build a backend API, and the data mapping will happen in the parent component. Okay, so going to our menu item first, let me show you the template of each individual menu item. It's going to be quite simple. So instead for exporting this menu item text word, what we're going to export here is going to be our template. But to think about, each item will come in as a property of the object, and that object is going to be called item. So in the parent component, when we do the mapping, we're going to map the menu array. Hopefully that's going to be the JSON array data, map that array into an object, and that object will come as a property value into our child component. So we're going to have this item, and then the next thing, we're going to have to define this item's data type. So item colon, and think about how many properties are we going to have. Have a look at the original one. We're going to have the title, the image, this is the ingredient, and also we're going to have the price. Hopefully we're also going to have an ID for it. So it's quite a bit of things. Therefore, we're going to define the data variable type like so. For each menu item, it's going to have its ID, the name, the preview image, the price, and also the ingredient. The path just defines that the ID is going to be a number and the price is going to be a number. Remaining things are all going to be strings. Alright, this is how we define it. And for the return, we're just going to return the template for each individual menu item. So delete that and get this in. So in this template, each individual menu item is going to take 6 columns, which is the half the screen size, and then show the image, and then show the content, give them a link that allow the user to click on to go to the individual page of each item, and then show the price and show the ingredient. Here we're going to use the Next.js built-in link component, so we're going to have to import it, and then you go about to see that link from Next.js link is there. So my habit is to move this above. Yep. So now everything has been set up in the menu item. Perfect. The next thing is to quickly finalize our CSS to make it look nice and beautiful. So what I'm going to do is to show you the CSS code, give them a certain margin, and then you have to control the size of the image, make sure it's in circle, so border radius 50%, and then for the menu content, make sure you have that margin properly set, and also alignment, justify content space between. For this dots, as you can see the original project, we have a bit of dots that connects the title and also the price, and this dots is achieved by the pseudo elements and give the content like so. Make sure that has been adjusted to the correct position. And also for the anchor tag, for the hover effect, for the span, for the ingredient, you just have to pay a bit more attention to their color and font size and font weight. Right, quite simple. So now the menu item has been finished. So I'm just going to close off this tool for now. The next job is to do what? If we do the data mapping now, we are not ready yet because we have not built the backend endpoint. So the next job is to get the data ready. In our data file, which we created this file in the previous session in the data folder, you open that up, and below us, we're going to create a new data, and that data is going to be called menu. And this is probably the largest data we're going to have, so I'm going to copy and paste in the menu data over here. Const menu that equals to the square bracket. Don't you worry about the availability of this data. I will share this file in the description link for free. So if you want to code along with me, or you want to reproduce this project based on your own thoughts, and you can have this data ready. All right, you don't have to type up. And we have that name, we have that price, and this is the directory for your preview images, which is in our public folder, assets folder. In the menu, you will have all of these images. You see, these are comes in a square shape, but we'll make it circle in the end. And then we have the ingredient, we have that starter category. So the category has been a starter, specialty, all those sort of things. All right. And then the description is just going to have a detailed description of that food. And this thing will not be shown on the home page. However, if you click on individual one, the description will be shown over here. Okay. So, but all the data that belong to the menu, ideally, supposed to be gathered together, not on a separate place. All right. This is the principle what we call the single source of truth. All right. If later on in the project you want to change data for the menu, or you want to add more, there's only going to be one place to amend. You're not going to touch everywhere else. So that's the principle what we call the single source of truth. All right. And we have that data ready. The next job is to build a backend endpoint API to serve this data, so that we can see the JSON array on our browser. And the way to do so is in our API folder. So far, we only have the YAuth, which is for the previous routes. We're now going to create another route inside API. So a new folder, and we call it menu. Menu, that's all. And it follows the same logic like what we illustrated in the previous session. Each folder under API represents one route. And for the Next.js to recognize that route, you have to give them a route file. And we have to create a new file called route.ts. That's all. Alright, so now we're going to use this route.ts to serve the data of the menu. And so the user can make the GET request and get all the JSON array data. So to make things easier, what I'm going to do is to copy the previous route file and paste it in. Instead of importing the YAuth data, we're now going to fetch the menu data. And this one is just going to be changed to menu as well. So now everything gets linked up. We have that menu routes. You can make the GET request from the backend API, and then hopefully the browser will show. Let's have a try. We're going to go to a local host. And it's going to be 3001/API/menu. Yep, it's all there. As you can see, this looks so beautiful. If your JSON looks all squeezed up and not looking as nice as this one. You just have to install one of the Google extension that is called the JSON Viewer. Once you install the JSON Viewer, it will automatically adjust the looking of your JSON data and make it look much more beautiful. So now we have that data ready. Sometimes say that can I also get the each individual one? Say for example, in the previous logic, if you have the localhost 3001/API/menu, that's the folder structure of this one. /API/menu, the routes will get this get request, right? What if you want to get the first one, the individual one? Can we achieve that? Let's see, /1, can it show the first one in JSON format? Unfortunately, it cannot. It goes to this 404 page because it's not found. Why is that? Because Next.js, when you want to build a dynamic routes handler, it does not work that way straight away. You have to tell the computer this one contains a dynamic routes handler. How do we do that? So it's also inside the manual folder. Without any problem, we create a new folder called ID. But that ID must have a square bracket around it. So hit enter. Whenever you create a folder in this format, square bracket ID or some ID you name it, that'll be recognized as a dynamic routes. Dynamic routes, it means that the Next.js will search how many items you have in your routes and give each individual one a specific route to serve the individual JSON. Alright, so that's the dynamic routes handler. And inside this ID, what we're gonna do, yes, we can have that a new route, and that new route is going to hold our individual get request. So over here we say, oops, a new route.ts. Just pay attention to this route is inside the square ID folder. This route is inside the menu. So the one outside is to get the entire menu array. The one inside ID is the dynamic individual routes handler to get a single menu item. Alright, so here I'm going to copy and paste in my code and explain to you how it works. Again, we're going to use the data from the menu, from this file. We're going to serve it again. However, here we're also going to write a get request, but this get request comes in with a built-in parameter that's called params. And this params, we're going to have an ID. The ID is going to be in a string. Okay, this is the way for the Next.js to get your routes parameter ID. Once you define that, whenever in the routes, we're going to say /1, and that one will show the individual item. Okay, so now go back. The following things is just to do a find. Because we know the ID of the item from the routes parameter, and we're going to use that routes parameter ID to go through the entire menu array to find the one that matches this ID. So the following things is just a TypeScript higher order array function to do a data matching. We're going to turn this one into a string, and we're going to find if anything inside my item array matches the routes parameter ID. If they match, I'm going to pick it up and then respond it as a JSON. Alright, that's how you achieve it. So because we are serving our data in a static data file for this project, for illustration purpose, I didn't make a database, okay? But in a real project, this is the position where you're going to do a select from your SQL, or you're going to do a find from your MongoDB, okay? You can talk to the database in this line of code and also respond whatever the database passes you back, okay? So this is a full stack project. You just have to do a tiny amendment over here so you can talk to the database. You also need to connect to your database at the very top, but maybe over here to connect to database before you make the request from the database. Okay. So the logic here, as a summary, the backend route code talks to the database and get a response to the database and pass the response to you. The front-end code gonna make the request to your backend endpoint to achieve that response result. All right, that's our idea. So once you have that done, hopefully we can try this time /1 to see if it shows. Wow, amazing. We can now access the first item in the menu array as a single get request. Okay, this single one only give us the first result. If we try number 2 or number 3, it'll give us the ID 3. Okay, so now we have built a dynamic routes handler to handle each individual one. The routes for the menu should be complete. Alright, let me just close this off and close this off. The next job is for us to build this menu section, and we're going to do quite a big data fetching from the backend endpoint that we just built, which is the manual one, this one. We're going to do a GET request from there. And another question I want you to ask, are we going to build this menu section component as a server component or a client component? Think about the original one. We do need to click on these filter buttons, allow the user to choose the category they want. So this section incurs user interaction with the component. It has to be in a client component. All right. If you do a server component, all the things must be served as a static result without change. Okay, because the data is built and fetched at the server side, and it does not allow you to provide any opportunity for user interaction. But if you want user to interact with it, it has to be the client component. So at the very top, what I'm going to do is to type in use client. So in that specifically, I tell Next.js it is going to be in a client component. And since we're going to use a lot of interaction, I'm going to import a few hooks. One is the use state, the other one is the use effect hook. And other than that, I think so far we're all good. So first thing in this work is going to do some kind of a data fetching. And the way we're going to do the data fetching in the client component is different from the server component. In the previous video, I showed you how to do a data fetching for the server component. By writing this kind of asynchronous function, we can get the data, and then we're going to call that function inside our component function. But the component function also has to be asynchronous. Because these things are all going to be handled at the server side, we have that time to wait until the data come back. All right, we don't have to worry about if the client is going to interact with it. But for client component, the data will be ready at the client side, which is the browser, not the server side. So we're going to do it in a different way. Use effect hook. So firstly, we're going to set up two local state variables. The first one is going to be the data. This data state variable is going to hold the original data that we fetch from the backend endpoint, which is this one. And also the second one is going to handle the dynamic change. Say for example, the user make the filter selection, they choose different category, we have to handle that state change on the browser. All right. This is to hold the original data, no one can touch it. This is to hold the dynamic data that's going to have the interaction between the user. And the second thing is going to write our functions, which is the get manual data function. And that is also going to be different, like so. First, we're still going to use the built-in fetch method to make the fetch like a GET request from the API we have just built, and that is going to be the local host 3001 actually, because we're now on this route 3001 /API/menu. And then once we have that, we're going to turn the response into JavaScript, and then we're going to set the local state variable into the one that we actually want. So set data into this manual data that we get from the backend. So this data will be changed. All right. And then if we catch any error in the process, we're going to console.log that error. So that's our logic. So now we have done the data fetching. The next job is to trigger this function whenever the manual section gets mounted on the browser. So that's what is called client component. This function will only be called when the manual section gets mounted on the browser by the use effect hook. The use effect hook will only work when the component gets mounted, and that's the time you call this function and you fetch the data and you make that data ready. And also at the same time, not only we want the data ready, but also we want the item ready as well. So I'm going to write another use effect hook. At the same time, I'm going to set the item to the data that we fetched from here. So basically, at the initial stage, this data and this item are going to be the same thing. But later on, it's going to be different because items will be handled by user interaction. This data is going to be used to store the original data that we fetched from the backend. All right. So this is what we're going to do. And the next thing for us to think about is what else? Going back to the original ones, we have the manual data. We have built our manual item, individual one, the filter. We also need to handle the filter, the click events. If you have a look, once I click on the starter, the second one turns to yellow, the first one turns to white. And same as for the salad, because which one you click on, that one will be turned on to active status. Only the active filter will show yellow, the remaining one will show white. How do we achieve that? We need to have a filter data as well. So open up your data file and then above or below that menu, doesn't really matter where you put it, we're going to create our static filter data. My habit, and also this is a good developing habit, is to have your data all separated from your code. What I mean by that is that someday you probably want to change data without affecting your code or your program. If you have your data all hard-coded into your code, that's a really bad way to develop your project because you have to touch your code, right? And on top of that, in the real project, this data is not going to be stored in a static data file. It's going to be served by database anyway. So that's why it's a good habit to always have your data separated from your JavaScript or your HTML code. So inside this data file, what I'm going to do is to copy and paste in that filter data. It's a very short and brief one, like so. So we will have 4 categories. The first one is all, and the second one is starter, the salad, and the specialty. We give them an ID, give them a category, and give them an active property. The first one will be set to true by default. Okay, the remaining 3 are all false. But once the user click on one of those filters, it should allow the user to change the active. Right? So that's the data. And then back to our menu, what I'm going to do is to import that filter that we have just create import filter, like so. So we have that filter data ready over here, and we're gonna map that filter to build our filter component. So down below here, firstly I'm going to copy and paste the entire menu section code, and I will explain to you what's going on there, like so. There's quite a few things we haven't built yet, but we'll come to it. Firstly, we're gonna name the section, give the ID of menu, and also a class name menu as well. Everything gonna be wrapped in a container. The first part of this section comes in as a section title. This is the component that we built in the previous session. If you haven't know how to build a section title component, please go back to see my first session video. But now we're just gonna import it directly from our component folder. So now it's over here. Once it's imported, we just have to tell the Next.js what's the title of your section and what's the subtitle of it. This part is done, the simplest one. The second part comes in as a row. In this row, it contains 12 columns, and display flags justify everything in the center. And then it comes in a list. This list will contain our filter data. The filter data is the one that we just imported from our data file. Okay? And we're going to do a data mapping. We map each filter into a list item. And inside this list item, we assign it with a key, on which is the filter ID, and also the class name is going to be important. We're going to do a conditional class name. In this conditional class name, we're going to check if this filter is on an active status. If it's yes, we're going to show this class name filter active so that it can be turned into yellow. Otherwise, it will be undefined. Okay? And then the last but not least is going to be the onClick events. This onClick events is going to handle whenever the user click on it, the active status of that filter actually changes, and also the category will be changes as well. Alright, so we have to build a function like so in this name right above. In the end, we're going to show the filter's name in the list. So right above over here, so far we're just going to create a const like so equals to, it's going to be a arrow function. So this arrow function will be handled very shortly. And think about how many variables or parameters it's going to take. It's firstly going to take a filter ID, and then it's going to take that filter category. So we need to pass in these two into the parameters over here. So one is going to be the ID, which is going to be a number. The other one is going to be the category. And that one is going to be a string. All right. So now this function is done. And you can see that the warning curly line has been moved away, even though we haven't built the body of the function yet, but the function structure is there. We'll come to it in a very quickly way. Alright, that's one part done. And the second row of this menu section, if you look at the original, where so far we are over here, I have done the first row. The second row is going to be the entire menu list. And that thing comes a bit more complicated. Firstly, everything going to be wrapped in a row, and also we're going to do some bit of a checking. Because we are fetching this data from the backend endpoint over here, in the real project, the data fetching might be asynchronous. What I mean by asynchronous is that it will not happen instantaneously. It will probably take a few seconds for the data to be ready to serve on your browser. So that's why we need to first check if the end item has been exists. If it exists, we're going to check if the item contains something. That basically means that the item's array must not be empty. If it's not empty, we're going to do the data mapping and map it into the manual item that we just built previously in the component folder. Like so, component folder, the manual item, which is this item template, we're going to map it into that. Alright, so let me just here import that component manual item. And you can see this one has been successfully imported down below. Somebody might notice that you have done the successful data mapping as well, but what is a preloader is for? This preloader is another component I built to show the pending stage while the data is loading. Alright, say for example, the data fetching due to different reasons might be poor internet connections or something wrong with the server. It might take a longer than expected time to get to your browser, and you can use this preloader to indicate the user that this one is still loading. Alright, so in a component folder now, what I wanted to do is to create a new component called preloader, tsx, enter, and also we're going to create a new file called preloader.css. So we have those two files ready, and back to here RFC to create a boilerplate, and then we're going to import that /preloader.css, get these two files combined. So I want to show you what this preloader looks like. It's actually one of the simplest component to be built, but it's a good habit to deal with it while the data is pending. In the code line, it's actually gonna have one div to return because the entire loader is built by pseudo element. So we're just gonna give a div and give the ID of preloader. And in a CSS, that's gonna take quite a long code over here. So what it's gonna do is that make sure it's position fixed and make sure it takes the whole screen. Top left and right bottom 0 basically means it takes the full corner of the screen and is standing at the very top of everything. It's gonna be overflow hidden. And then we have a pseudo elements that shows how this thing looks, and then we give it a animate preloader to make sure it rotates from 0 degree to 360 degree like a circle, and that'll like a spinning effect to show to the user. Alright, so once we have that, we have the preloader component, and then over here we're going to import that. So just say delete the last letter, retype it, tab. So now this preloader gets imported from the component folder. Okay, it's going to be quite simple. So now if we do the data mapping, it should have, if it takes a time to load the data, this preloader should show on the browser. However, given that we are serving the data from the static file, probably you won't be able to see on my browser because it's too quick for the loader to show. And one more last job is for us to put in the manual.css to finalize this section. So what I'm going to do, open up the CSS file. I'm going to copy and paste in. So for the menu filter, we're going to give a bit of a define for the paddings and margins and the list style. And also for each list, we're going to make sure it has some certain font size and the font color. Make sure you define the transition. And also for the hover effect, make sure the hover effect is going to work and turn it into the yellow, which is the same color. So after you've done all of that, this menu should be ready to serve on the browser. So let's now, finger crossed, to import it over here. The menu, tab, close it. So now the menu, oops, one is imported above YS. Oh, it's in the alphabetical order, that's okay. The menu has now been imported. If we're going back, refresh it, and then have a look, whoops, that menu is there. That looks all okay for me. That looks perfect. We haven't built the individual page yet, so even I click on it, it will take us to that page which is not exist yet. Let me try. See, this page is not even exist. But it's okay. You can see this menu section here with the title proper, with all of the font and format correctly demonstrated. The next job is for us to finalize the function. Whenever the user click on this filter button, it should done the filter job and also change the active status of each filter. Alright, so going back to our menu, here we have that handle filter change, but we haven't been able to turn on the active status yet. Let's do the things one by one. So the handle filter change, I'm going to copy and paste in the code that I wrote, like so. Firstly, we're going to check if the user can choose the category of all, if they select all, we're going to reset the item data to the original data. That's why I keep the original data as what it is, never going to touch it, because you must have the original complete set of the data that you fetched from the backend. Whenever the user click on all, basically means that they want to see every single menu. You're going to reset item to the original data. Alright. Otherwise, if it's not all, we're going to just do a simple filtering. This filter is a JavaScript higher order array function in ES6. Okay. And then up in the filter, what we're going to do is for each item, we're going to go through each item in the data array, and we're going to find the item category that matches the category that the user choose. This category is what has been passed in the parameter. This category will be the mapping for each of the items category. Alright, if they find a perfect match, that thing is going to be filtered out, and the remaining things will be hidden in the data set. This thing will be automatically done for you. So once they have done the data filtering, we're going to reset the item to the new filtered data, like so. So this is like a combined code. Someone may want to say that, can I write a code like this? First, I'm going to create a new variable called result, and that thing is going to equal to that. Once I done that, I set item to result, like so. That's perfectly fine, no problem. You just do the filtering first. Once you have the filter data, you store it to a new variable, and then you reset item to change your state, the component state, to that new filter data. But this will cost you one more line of code. And why don't you just save the variable assignment part and then write them all together? This looks much more fancier, right? It's like a more advanced way of writing the TypeScript code. So we've done that. So this thing's done. Let's just going back to see if it works on your computer. If we click on the starter, well, you can see the item changes, the salad it changes, specialty changes, or it gives you the old items. The filter works, all right? But not complete yet, because you can see even the category item changes, but the font color doesn't change, all right? Still, the first one all shows in the yellow. I want this one to change accordingly to whichever category I click on. How do we achieve that? We have to write another function above it, and that is going to be called handle filter active. I'm just going to copy and paste in straight away, so to make things easier. You have to tell the computer which the ID of the filter that has been clicked on, and then we map through that filter to. Firstly, we're going to turn all the filters active status to false, and we go through every single one of the filter to check if that filter's ID equal to the ID that we have clicked on. If it's yes, we change that filter's active status to true. Otherwise, it's going to be all false. This is how we switch the active status for each one. Alright, so we write this function. The next question is, how do we use this? We never have a place to use this. It's going to be passed in our handle filter change, because when the user click on the button, one job is to do the filtering, another job is to change the color, right? So each click event should have two jobs, and so that function must be passed in. Just copy that over here and give the brackets. The parameter has been passed in over here with the ID, so we're just going to use that. Alright, so now we have the complete thing done. Whenever the user click on this filter, the handle filter change function will be triggered, and this function will trigger the handle filter active function. So the color will change, the filter function will change. Everything's done. So now let's go back to localhost 3001, refresh it to see if it works. Starter, it works. The starter color changes. Salad, it works. Specialty works. Go back to all. The color all changes accordingly. Perfect. All right. So now in this section, this is quite a big section. A big job for the data mapping for a client component. And first we build the backend API endpoint for the menu, this one, and also we build the dynamic API endpoint for each one, like so. And also I have taught you how to do a data fetching in a client component. Use that React hook. We made a get request from the backend. We update the local state variable, and then we do the data mapping here. Right? That's the entire logic. The next part, I'm going to finalize this as a whole, is that when the user, say for example, in the starter, I click on the first one, click on each individual item, it should take the user to that specific page with that ID in the routes. Alright, but so far we haven't been able to achieve this. I'm going to show you how to build a multiple page inside next.js. Go back to the editor, close out a few things that is not necessary so far, and leave this on. to create a dynamic routes for that individual page of the menu, what we're going to do is to create a new folder. So close off this view, because I want you to see the entire folder structure. Close off the public as well. So it must be inside that app folder, and we create a new folder called menu. That's all, right? And then once we create that menu folder, inside here, because we are building a dynamic route for each individual page, we have a multiple page for each individual item inside the menu array, right? So we're going to create a new folder called ID, which is the same logic as what we introduced in the API folder. It's the same for the page, all right? However, the naming convention is going to be different. In the API, in the menu folder, in the Square ID folder, we name it routes. So that in that way, Next.js will know this is going to be an endpoint. However, here we are building the front-end page. So inside the Square ID, we're going to create a new file called page.tsx. All right. So we're done in that way. So now you have that page, RFC, and then we can have a template. So give it a name. Let's call it the menu. Maybe single. So menu single. So that looks more specific, and the user will know what's going on here. And then we're going back to that menu single page to think about how do we design these things. Do we going to make another API endpoint GET request? Yes, we do, because here we do have that endpoint for each individual menu item. So here we're going to make the request to this item, right? However, to make it dynamic, the key thing is that to use the routes parameter, which is the ID, to make the request. Each item have a different ID, and if each different ID should have a different API endpoint route. And we're going to do that. And we know that inside this dynamic routes for each one, it comes with a built-in parameter, and that is called params. And that params is going to be our key to get the routes parameter. So here we're going to say params. We want the ID, and the ID is going to be a string, like so. So now we're going to abstract destructuring that params, and we know that inside the params we want ID is going to be a string. This part is just going to be the variable definition for the variable type, but essentially we use this part. This is the JavaScript object destructuring. All right. The major differences between the JavaScript and TypeScript is that in TypeScript it's going to be more specific on the data type, but in JavaScript you can ignore this part. In JavaScript you don't have to write this. It would also work. However, in TypeScript it will show you that error line because you haven't defined the data type yet. All right, so that's the major difference. So once we've done that, the next job is just going to be we're going to get that ID. So we create a variable called ID, and that is going to be params dot ID done. All right, so now we have that ID. So inside here, what I wanted to do is to create so far, let's just say if we can show that ID on the browser, just say a div ID. So now we have that individual page to hold each individual menu item, and also we want to show the ID number on the screen. So we're going back here, and we're going to the menu. Let's click on the first one. Yep, it does take us to that page without showing any error. This one is not quite so obvious. Let me make it even more obvious by saying this is going to be the H1, and passing that ID. Maybe give the words menu dash ID. So now if I go back, I click on this one, you can see it's over here, menu dash 6. All right, it can show that ID, the route parameter on our screen, so we get it. Right, that's the most important job. As long as you can get ID from the route, so long you can make the GET request to the backend API for this one. All right, so the next part is going to make that GET request. And to think about it, if this one is going to be in a server component and going to be in a client component, have a look at the original project. It's serving the static data to the user. There's no buttons or interactions for user to change the state of this component. So I would say this one can be a server component. Right? You have to decide on your own which one is going to be the server or the client component. The server component has the benefit of serving faster. You don't have to worry about so much about SEO because everything has been built on the server side and served directly on the browser. The client component have the advantage of providing a lot of dynamic interactions with the user. However, it's built on the browser and a lot of documents going to be sent. So this is going to reduce the speed, efficiency, and probably affects your SEO, right? So it's up to you what you do. I'm going to build this one as a server component with one images on the left-hand side and a whole lot of descriptions on the right-hand side. Simple job. But you can notice from the original project, we do have a sort of like a breadcrumb with the page name and also allow you to swap between pages. So we're going to build another component to achieve this purpose as well, and we call it the breadcrumb. So inside that component folder, what I want you to do is to create a new component, a new file, and we call it breadcrumb, tsx, enter. So now you will have that things to serve, and to think about what is thing contained. Same time, build another file, breadcrumb, css, enter. So RFC to have that done, and this thing is going to be import that import that one in. So now we have that done, all good. So the key part for this one is to take the property from the parent component, and we're going to make this one dynamic, right? Because you're not going to be sure how many pages you have, and each individual page should have that breadcrumb. So we should let the next.js know this is going to be a dynamic component by taking a property called page, and that is going to be the page name. And we say that page is going to be the string, have to define the variable type, like so. And then the next thing is just going to be the template for this component. So delete that, copy this in. Here we're going to use the next.js building component link, so I'm going to import it over here. And maybe I move it above, like so. So the page is going to be passed in as a property, and its value is going to be shown here. So every time the user goes to a certain page, it will allow you to swap between the home page and also your specific page. All right. And the remaining job is just to put in our breadcrumb CSS, like so. Give a certain padding, make sure it's a screen adjustable. Define the font size and for your list, and also the margins, the paddings. The thing for you to pay attention to is that there's a very faded slash between the home button and the menu, and that thing is done by pseudo element, like so. So it's not something you hard coded. So we do the pseudo element, give the color, and also the content is just a slash. All right. In that way, you can adjust the position of it in a more proper way. This is just a responsive design. You can look at it yourself. Once we've done that, the breadcrumb is done. So we're going back to our page, and we are ready to build the entire menu individual page. Okay. So on the individual page, what I'm going to do is just delete that. Give a parentheses, and to think about where the data come from. Because we have decided to build this one as a server component, we can use the same logic like what we did in the previous session for the YAuth section, right? To write a asynchronous function and then fetch the data from the backend. So here it's going to be quite simple. What I would do, above that function, I'm going to write a asynchronous function, get food data, and we need an ID. This ID is going to be get from the route parameter over here. And then we use that route parameter to do a GET request from the backend. It should be localhost 3001/API/menu, all of those things. And then we're going to get the ID. This thing comes dynamically, right, as a part of the string. This is called JavaScript template literal. So when you use backtick to wrap things up, inside it you can write string, and also you can also use the money sign and the double curly braces to pass in the dynamic variables. Right, this is how we achieve the dynamic GET request. Whenever the user passes in a new ID, this thing will change, and a new request will be made, and then we return the JSON converted to JavaScript to the user. So now we have that thing done, and the next job is that inside our function, since we use the asynchronous, we have to say this one is going to be async function as well. We're going to call this getFood using await. We're going to call this method, and then we're going to basically make a GET request from the backend API, and that is this one. And we know that we have already found our route parameter from this object destructuring, so we can have the ID ready, so the ID is passing here. All right, so that's the logic. And after all that things done, the last job is for me to put in my template, like so. First, we're going to use the breadcrumbs that we just have built, which is this one, breadcrumbs. And then I'm going to import it. Import. So this one has been imported from the above, like so. And the next thing is that we're going to have images on the left-hand side. So here I'm going to use that next.js built-in image component. So I'm going to import it. So import next.js images. That's it, right? So now we import image from next.js. And one last thing is that we have to give a height and width. So whenever you use the next.js image component, you must define the height and width of it. But since you give a class name of image fluid, this is the Bootstrap default image class name, which allow your image to be fully responsive. Alright, you don't have to worry about if it's too high or too tall. This one will adjust your image size automatically. Okay, so that's from the left hand side. On the right hand side is going to be 6 columns, which contain the food name, the ingredient, and the description, everything. Okay, we've done the pages, which is the structure, and we know that we're pretty much done with this individual page. Let's go back to see. Wow, it's there. Right, let me just try from the beginning. Say we're going to here. The filter is working, and now I want to see this Greek salad. I click on it, so it has perfectly made that GET request from the backend and fetch the images in the size that I want, and also give me that title, the ingredient, also the description. All right, and this one we know that ID is 7. If we go into the backend to check and ID 7, that'll give us the 7 as a return. This is the response. All right, so this is the backend API endpoint, and this is the front end. So we are building a full stack website. Alright, so now the individual page has also been finalized. We are pretty much done with our menu, the entire menu section. That's sort of like one of the important sections for this project, because it shows you multiple skills. One is that how you fetch data from the backend if you're building a client component. The other one is that if you're building a server component, how you do the data fetching by running these asynchronous functions, and how you map the data. All right, so there's a lot of wrapping. I'm going to close this off. All right, and the next part, let's see. After we've done the menu, we are going to that special, which is a new kind of a server. I'm going to show you how to build this kind of a server and allow you to swap between different informations and images. It's actually a very similar idea to the above one, but still it's a good chance to practice the server handling skills. Let's just do it right now. So to start off this specialty section, what we're going to do is to, in the section folder, create a new file called the specials.tsx. So that's going to be in the component file. And then very quickly in the section folder, create a new file called special.css. So that's going to be the starting file, and RFC to create a boilerplate. And right after that, we're just going to import /special.css. So these two files are linked together. And to think about this special component, is this going to be the client component or the server component? Have a look at the original design over here. As you can see, when you click on one of the filters, this item actually changes. The body of the content changes, and also the image changes as well. So obviously, this section allows the user to interact with it. So that's going to be a client component, because the state of the variable is not static. All right. And based on that, what we're going to do here is to create this one as a client component as well. So single quotation, use client at the very beginning of the component. And now the next job is to think about where does the data come from. We have to build a separate routes, a separate API endpoint for this component to make the GET request for that endpoint, and then map the data into the special item component. All right. So best idea to do is that inside our data folder, we found our static data folder, because in this project we are serving all of the data from this static data folder and this data file. And then the next job, what I'm going to do is to copy and paste in the data that I prepared for this special parts. So there's going to be two arrays to be created. The first one is going to be the special item array, which contains the ID of that special item, the image routes, the title, the subtitle, and the content, if it's inactive or not. The first one has always been set to true by default, but the remaining are set to false by default. Alright, so once we do the state change, the active status of the variable will be changed based on the user's click events. And when you look at the special filter, which is this one, that will allow you to change and swap between one to another. And the first one is set to true, the remaining one are set to false as well. You don't have to worry about the data file, because I'm sharing this file and down the link in the description, so you can download it straight away. Alright, so now we have the data ready. The next job is to create a new route in our API folder, so this data can be served at the backend. So in the API folder, we create a new folder and call it the specials. And inside here, we create a new file like the typical way. It has to be named the route.ts. So it's like the convention for the Next.js project. If you wanted the Next.js to identify endpoint routes, you have to name the routes. If you wanted to identify the front-end page, you have to name the page, like what we did in the menu. Here in the menu, in the Square ID folder, we name the page. That's how the Next.js can find this page straight away for each dynamic item. So this name has been defined by default. You cannot name it to someone else, otherwise Net.js won't work. Okay. So now in the route file, what we're gonna do, this one, is to set up and create the get routes for this special item. First, we import the data from our data folder and the data file, which is the one we just created over here. And then we use the asynchronous function to create a get function, export it, and then return a response.json. So that's going to be the JSON array, which contains the JSON objects to load the data of the special. So to test it out, what I'm going to do is to go to that local host. I want it to be 3001/API/special. Oopsie. Specials. So now you can see this route has been successfully created and it shows on the browser. This is our special API endpoint, which contains all the special items. So the next job is for the front end to make the get request to this endpoint and then get the data from it and then map the data into our front end template. Okay, so close this off, this one's done. Close this off, that one's done. So in the special, what we're going to do is to make the get request from it. And because it's a client component, we cannot use the asynchronous function to make the get request like how we did in the YAsk component, which is this one, because that's a server component, everything's static, so we can use this asynchronous function to make the get request. However, this is a client component. It allows user to interact with it. To do so, we have to use the front-end hook, which is the use state hook, and also the use effect hook to set up this thing. And the next job is to create those local state variable. One is the data state variable. This one is used to store the original special data that we fetched from this endpoint. The other one is the item. This item is used to handle the state animation, because we do need to change the state of this array and each object, especially in terms of the active. Sometimes the first one needs to be true. Sometimes if the user click on the second one must be turned to true, and the remaining one must be set to false. Alright, that is what we call the state change. As long as the state change, we have to use state variable to handle it. And the next part is to use the function to make the get request to the backend API, like so. So we're going to make a get request from this endpoint, localhost 3001/API/special. Make that, and then this is a promise. Once you use the fetch function, it's going to return you with a promise, and then you consume that promise using then to convert that response into your JavaScript object and a JavaScript array, and then you set your local state variable data to the data that you fetched from the backend, which is the above one. If you catch any error in the process, you're just going to console.log that error. Okay, so how do we trigger this function? We just create that function. Well, you can see this one has been fade away. It never has been used. We trigger this function whenever the special section component gets mounted on the browser. All right, using that use effect hook. The use effect hook allows you to trigger something when this component gets mounted on the browser, and we want to trigger that get data function, and the data is ready. Okay, and the last job is that not only when the component gets mounted in the browser, we retrieve the data from the backend. We also want to set another local variable, which is a set item, to the data that we have get from the backend, because this one is going to be used to handle the state change. All right, all the data manipulation has been done. The next part is for us to think about how do we do the data mapping and stuff. All right, so what I'm going to do is to create another component, because if you look at the original, eventually all of these things is going to be mapped into some kind of a template, which is a special item template that contains the title, the body, and also the images, right? So whichever one you click on, it shares the same kind of a front-end template. We're going to have to create that template as a separate component, otherwise the data mapping is going to be really messy. So what I'm going to do, in the component folder, create a new file called specials item tsx, and then at the same time a new file called special item .css. All right, so just double check that the name are matching, so it's plural, that's no problem. So in the TSS file, it is RFC to create a boilerplate, and then I wanted to import that CSS file, specials item.css. All right, so this is our child component. When we do the data mapping in the parent component specials, we're going to map this data, this item data, into this special item template component. This is our child component. All right, so we're going to build our child component first. Otherwise, when we do the mapping, there will be no child component for us to map into. First, to think about, each child component must take a property value, and that is going to be the item, which is the object, right? So we're doing the object destruction here, and then the next job for you to do is to think about it is going to be what kind of object. All right, so you're going to have to define this data type. So for item, we're going to define this data type as an object, and this object is going to contain many properties, which include the ID, that is going to be a number, the images is going to be a string, the title is going to be a string, so on and so forth, and active is going to be the boolean. How do I know this? Because if you look at the endpoint, that's what it contains. The ID is a number, the image is just a URL, which is the directory, which is a string, because it's wrapped by the double quotation, and also the title, the subtitle, the content, they're all strings, right? Only the active one, that one is a boolean. So when we look at the original data, that's what the type is, and you just have to define the type same as your JSON file, right? This is a TypeScript. It's a more strict language than JavaScript. Anything you can do in JavaScript, you can achieve here in TypeScript. However, the TypeScript allows you to have more accurate definition for the data type, which is good. And once we have that, and in the return part, I'm just going to copy and paste in my return template so that our subcomponent can be done. Parentheses, that one is in, so all done. So what it does is that it's going to be a tab pane, and we're going to check if this one is on active or not. If the item is on active, we're going to show it, otherwise we'll hide this class name. So this is what we call a conditional rendering of the class name. And then for the ID, we're going to assign each item over here. We're going to assign each one of those an ID, and that ID is going to be the item ID that we fetched from the object, right? And then we get a title of it, the subtitle, the content, and the image routes, all of those things. So now we have all of these templates ready, and also the data type defined. It should be good. The next part is going to be the CSS file, because I want it to look really nice. And so for the specialty item in the CSS, what I'm going to do is to copy and paste in a very brief one. If it's on active, we're going to give a bit of animation, otherwise we don't have that. And for the special H3 title, we make sure we adjust the font size and font weight. The remaining things is just the column and margin. Really simple, okay? You can go through it yourself. So that one is done, and this one is done as well. So we've done the special child component. and the next job is for us to do the data mapping for this parent component. So let me firstly copy and paste in the entire section component and explain it to you. Like so. So what it does is that it's going to have a section with ID of special and a class name of specials as well, and it's going to be in the Bootstrap container. So we wrap everything in the container, and the first element inside the section is going to be the section title component that we created previously. So I'm going to delete this one and import that section title. We title this one special, and then the subtitle is the checkout specials, right? And the second one is going to be a row. As you can see, it's going to be a row, and inside this row it contains a 3 column and a 9 column. So one row is separated into 2 parts. The first part is on the left, and that's going to take 3 columns, and the second part is going to be on the right hand side, which takes the 9 columns. All right, and add up in total 9 plus 3 equals to 12, which is made up of 1 row. Perfect. However, you have noticed that we have some data mapping for the filter as well. That's correct, because when you look at it, the filter of the data is actually contained in our data file as well. It's not just something that we created randomly. So what we're going to do, if you look at our data file, the data folder, over here, we did create that filter file here. So what we're going to do is to import these special filters and then map that filter into our front-end template, like so. So at the above, what we do is to import that filters, special filters from the data, and then you have that one as a static data served here. This filter has been built as a static data instead of a backend route because it's unnecessary to retrieve the filter information from the backend, right? But the body of the filter can be in the backend because this one are changeable. Normally the filter itself is not changeable, right? Because that represents the category of the item. The item itself, the body, the content can be dynamic, all right? So when you build a project, you're gonna have to make sure which one's dynamic, which one's gonna be static. Not necessarily for everything to be retrieved from the backend, which increases the load of your database. Okay. So now the filter gets mapped into another one, and in the end, it's going to be in the click button, which is the anchor tag that wraps the filter's name. And we know that when a user clicks on the things, it should allow the filter to change. So we're going to create a function called handle special change, right? So that'll change the item from one to another. So over here, we say const handle filter change equals to, that is going to be a arrow function, and inside here we're going to take the filter's ID. So we're going to say pass in the parameters, and that is going to be the ID, and we know that it's going to be a number. That's all, right? So far we just leave it like so, and later on when we finalize it, I'll show you how to build this function, but so far this arrow has been moved. And when we look at next, is that on the right hand side, which is the 9 column, we're going to have this data mapping. But before we map the data into the actual child component, we're going to do a lot of check, right? First, we're going to check if the item has exist. If it does not exist, we have to show the preloader element or component that we built previously. So I'm going to import this preloader. The reason is because if the item data is not ready, basically means probably the internet is not good, probably we're still talking to the database, we just have to wait for a while for the data to be fetched back, right? So in that situation, the preloader should show to the user that we are loading the data, okay? It's like a spinning effect animation. However, if this one is not empty, we're going to check the length of it. If the length is greater than 0, basically means we do have the data ready inside the items array, and then we're going to do the mapping. We mapped everything into the special item subcomponent, which is the child component that we have just built. So I'm just going to import this one as well. Assign the key and pass in the item as an object. Here you can say that even when I do the mapping, we still have to do the definition of the data type. All right, the data type of the item is the same as what you see in the JSON file. Okay, so now pretty much everything has been done, and the remaining job is to finalize this handle special change function. So everything should be working fine now. So going to the above, in this handle change, what we're going to do is going to be very similar to the previous one that we did. We're going to firstly map through the entire array to find out which one is the user that has just clicked on, and we're going to change the active status of the one that the user clicked on to true, right? All the things that matters is the active property, which is this one. that thing controls which one gets to show and which one we need to hide, right? And that thing controls the color of the button that we click on. Only the one that you click on, the background color will change to the same color yellow, otherwise it's gonna be black. Alright, so the auto job is to do the change for this active status. So I copy and paste in the code. Firstly, we do the item mapping. We map through the entire item, and then we make everyone to false. We found the one that you actually click on. If the item's ID matches the ID that you pass in, which is the one you click on, and then you set that one to true, and then you return that item. Once you change the entire array through this higher order array function, you assign it to a new variable, and then you send the local state variable item to that updated items. Alright, that's the logic. This is the reason why I created two local state variables. One is to use to store the original data. The other one is to use to handle the state change. Alright, otherwise you will lose the access to the original data. Okay, that's one thing. So now if we're going back, hopefully you'll see something. Oh, we haven't imported that thing yet. Let me just do one more job in the special CSS. What I want to do is to put in this CSS code so it will look much nicer. Quickly go through it. Special overflow going to be hidden, and then we want to make sure that our nav link have some special colors and some borders, and also when you hover on it or you click on it, it has some special effects. It's a very simple code. So we've done that. This one's here, that one gets linked in, the special CSS linked in. So in the page, we're going to have to import this special component as a section. So specials, import that, close the angle brackets, and then if we go back, you can see this one has been successfully imported, and the looking is all correct. If you click on it, you will see the item actually changes because the image changes is quite obvious. However, there's one thing incorrect, which is the button's color. Whichever one is active, that button color's background is supposed to be the golden one, right? However, this one is not changing so far. So what it means is that we have to write another function inside the handle special change to enable that button color change. However, what I like to do is to write it outside and then reuse it. So the function is like so. Handle filter active. So we're going to filter through the special filter array, map them into all the single element of the array, and we set everyone to false because in the data, remember, these special filters also have that active status. The first one has been set to true by default, all remaining one are false. That's why you get to see the first one with the background yellow and the remaining one are all black, right? So now our job is to, when a user click on it, we want to change the active status of the filter to the one the user has been clicking on. So we map them through and then set everything to false. And then we found if any of the filter actually matches the one the user click on, we do the ID matching. If we find it, we set that filter specifically to true. Alright? So we have this function. The second question is, how do we use it? We use it inside the handle special change. Because remember, when the user trigger on the click events, only the handle special change will be triggered, nothing else. Alright? It's only allowed to have one function to be triggered at a time. So you must call the above function inside the handle special change. That's how you do it. So here we say handle filter active, and then we know we're going to share the same parameter, which is the ID. As long as you know the ID of the filter the user has been clicking on, so long you can have everything done. Alright, so now it's all set up. Going back to our project, if you click on the second one, you can see the color changes. The third one, the background color changes, and also the content, the images all changes. Alright, so this one is another way of handling the clicking filter, which is very similar to the previous one, but it's a really good practice and a very handy use in a real life project. You're going to encounter a lot of this. I hope you guys can all handle it well. Okay, so that's one part of our project has been successfully implemented. The next one, let me have a look. The next one is going to be the events section. The events section is different from the above. The technique we applied here is called React Swipers. We use something called swiper.js. That's going to be a third-party library to support the building of this section, because they allow the user to swipe from one item to another, and also allow you to use your mouse or finger to swipe on the screen to change from one to another. Alright, doesn't matter how many you have, it's just depending on the bullet point underneath. Here we only have 3 types, that's why I have 3 bullet points. If you have 10 items to be swiped on, and that's going to have 10 bullet points down here. Alright, so we're going to introduce you in this section how you can do a swiping effect inside the next.js. Let me show you right now. So to build an events section, what we're first going to do is to import the events data. So later on, we're going to map the data. It's going to save a lot of work. So in our data.ts file, I'm going to copy and paste in the events data. It's going to be an array which contains the JavaScript object. Each one has a property of ID, image routes, the title, the price of the event's booking, and also the content, the detail. The detail is going to be a sub-array inside the objects, as you can see, and each detail contains 3 string elements, and then in the end, it's going to be a summary. All right, so that's going to be the template for our events data. So once we have that, the second thing we want to do is to create a route for this events data directly. So later on, we're going to use the data or fetch the API. It's going to be much easier. So inside our API folder, create a new folder called events. And then inside it, create a file called route.ts. Right? So now we have that route file done. The next part is to create a handler. So we import events from the data file, and then we set up the asynchronous function called get, and we return the response.json, which is the events array that we just created. All right. So we serve the static data as the get routes and export it, and then we return it localhost 3001/API/events. Just give it a refresh. And let me have a look. Oh, I haven't saved this file. Sorry about it. Saved it, and then refresh. As you can see, this thing has been shown successfully on your API endpoint, and the format of it is going to be very, very similar to our JavaScript file, except that this is a JSON file. And then later on, we're going to make the GET request from this endpoint, and then fetch this data, and then map the data into our front-end template. Okay, so back here, we close this data file, and we close this routes file. Now we're in the page. The next job is going to create a component. Firstly, I want you to create a section component inside a section folder, and that is going to be called event.tsx. And then, very quickly, another one is going to be called event.css. So we have these two RFC to create a boilerplate, and then you want to import /events.css. So you have that thing gets imported. So now these two files are combined together. The next job is for us to think about how we're going to create these events. If you look at the original project, it's going to be a swiper. So this is definitely going to include a swiper. And for the swiper, at the very beginning of the video, in the first session, you have to go back to the first session if you haven't installed this one. However, if you look at that package.json file, you will see there's going to be a swiper. You just need to install this in your terminal, and then you can use the swiper inside the Next.js project. Okay? So what we're going to do here, firstly, I'm going to define this events as a client component because it uses a swiper. That's a user interaction. And then it has to be a client component. And then the second one, since we define it as a user component, if we want to fetch data, we must use the use state hook and also the use events hook, effects hook. That's two things done. And then since we're going to use a swiper, so what I'm going to do is to import all of those swiper things over here. Make sure that you import your customized CSS at the end, which will override anything above. Say, for example, if in the swiper.css, it has some definition for the styling of the swiper, and you want to customize it, you can customize it in your events.css file, and that'll override the swiper CSS. All right? The order matters in the project. So we import all of those things. And then the next thing to think about is to do the data fetching, right? So like we did before, first we set up a local state variable for each swiper slide. So we say slides, it's going to be an array, and there's going to be a local state variable. Initially, we set it to empty. All right, this is the TypeScript thing. It's going to be either any or an array. Okay, because we're not sure yet what it is. Before we do the data fetching, the data type is unclear. It could be any, and once it's ready to be served as a JSON array, and the data comes in, it's going to be an array. So we use a union data type to define it here. Otherwise, it will pop up as an error. Okay. The next job is to do the get data. So we get event data from the backend, which is the localhost 3001/API/events. And once we get it, we consume that promise into a JavaScript object, and then we update the local state variable. If there's any errors, we console.log.error. Okay, we want to call this function when the events section component gets mounted on the browser. So that's where we use the effect hook to trigger this function. Everything has been set up correctly now. The next job is for us to think about how we do it. If we write every single code into this page, that's going to be quite too long, because if we look at it, each slide in the swiper share the same template. Again, when we do the data mapping, we want to map all the data into this slide template, right? So that's a slide template is going to be in a separate component. So what we're going to do is inside our component folder, create a new file, and that is going to be called events item.tsx, and also a new file, events item.css. All right. So what we do, RFC, we create a boilerplate for that item one, which is a single one, and then we're going to import that / events item.css. Okay, so that thing is done. So these two are combined together. And then to think about it, each events item is going to be mapped. It's going to take that mapped into data, right? Initially, the events is going to be the parent component. It fetch data and update the local state variable slides into that JSON array, and then we're going to map these slides into that events item. All right. So this thing is going to take a property called item, and we know that it's going to have some data type declaration. So over here we say item is going to be a object, and each property of the object is going to be defined over here. For the data type, we want ID to be a number, the image is going to be a string, the title string, the price is going to be a number, the content is going to be a string, the details, which is going to be a string array. Okay, this is how you define the variable type for a string array, and the summary is going to be a string. Okay, so now we have done the data declaration and a data type definition. How you do that? How do you know the data type? It's because when you look at a JSON, that's going to be a number, string, string, number, string, string array, string. Okay, so this is the how you fetch and define your data type. All right, so we've done that. The next part is going to set up our item template. The template is actually quite simple. So I delete this one, parentheses, put it in. As you can see, each slide is going to be wrapped into one row. That's going to be events item. On the left-hand side, that's going to take a 6 column, which is the image. All right. On the right-hand side, that's going to be another 6 column, which is half the screen. That's going to contain our title, the price, the content, and most importantly, we want to have the detail. If you look at the original project, the detail comes to 3 separate lines: the first line, second line, and the third line. That's the details part. Right? So, but we do not want to hard code all the details. That's why when we set up the data structure, the models wrap the details into an array. All right. So here, because the detail comes in as an array, we can do another higher order array function here, which is the details.map. We map that details into that each line. Okay. First, we're going to check if the details length is greater than 0. If it's greater than 0, basically means that we have the content inside the detail, and then we do the mapping. We use the index as the key, so that could be unique, and then we map it into the list item. All right, so that's how you achieve this. As you can see, this data mapping is really, really handy and useful. You can use it anywhere in any kind of situation. And in the end, we want to have that item summary down the bottom. So this is the template to hold each event's item. And you can see left-hand side is the image, right-hand side is the content. Quite obvious, right? And the next job is going to be the data mapping and the swiper setup. Okay, so over here, what I'm going to do inside events is going to copy and paste in the entire section. I'll explain it to you. Like so. So what it does is that we create a section called events. The ID name is events, and the class name is also events. And inside here, everything going to be wrapped inside a container. All right. So the first part inside that event is going to be our section title component. We have done this component before. That's why you can reuse it repetitively again and again. Very, very convenient and buy yourself time. Okay. So that's one thing done. The second part you want to do is to set up the swiper. The swiper is like so. With the opening tag, all the things are wrapped over here belong to the opening tag. Okay, this is the opening tag of the swiper, and then inside here you do the mapping. You map the slides into our events item, and then you close it with a closing swiper tag. Down the bottom is a swiper pagination bullet point. Okay, so that's how you do it. And to set up the structure of the swiper, you have to tell next.js if the space between each item, the autoplay space, 5000 means half second, and then where is the pagination, how you want the pagination to look. We want it to be in the bullet and clickable, and the pagination is going to be the element with the class name swiper pagination, which matched up this one. Okay, and then down here you want to say which model I have used. Here we used autoplay, so it can move itself. Okay, and then we use the pagination module. You have to link them inside an array. Do you want the swiper to be a loop? Yes, we want it to be. Once you finish the last one, you start from the first one and over again. Okay, and then if you want to give the class name specifically to your swiper, you can do so over here. And the next part is going to be our mapping, because we fetch the data, remember, from this backend API, and then we update the local state variable slides into that backend data. So now the slide is ready. We mapped it into our child component. The child component, to show it in the slide effect, we have to wrap everything inside the swiper slide. So the element that we created, events item, must be wrapped inside a swiper slide. You might ask where this thing comes from. This is a default component that comes from the swiper.js. So you don't have to worry about it. You just need to import swiper, import swiper slides. It's like a conventional combination whenever you use a swiper inside a React. Okay, so now you import that and you use it here, assign it a unique key, and then wrap your events item that you want to have your slide to put on. I'm just going to import this one that we created. Double check the bar, this thing has been imported correctly. Okay, you might want to move this two line to be safe above that import events.css, so it looks much nicer. And now everything has been set up correctly. Okay, so this is how you do the swiper inside the next.js. The one last job is to finalize our events.css because we want to make it look nice. So in our events file, I'm just going to copy and paste in this events.css. First, we want the events to have the background image, which is inside a public folder, assets image, and the events BG. Alright, so all the images are stored inside this assets folder over here, which I set up and initialized in our first session's video. If you haven't got a chance to watch the first one, please go back to see the first session before you jump onto the second one. Alright, but you don't have to worry about the source of the image because I will share the things down the description link. Okay, so you can download them straight away. And then once you set it up, you want to have a pseudo element, which is like a dark shade cover, so that the image won't be so bright, which overflow your font. And then you define the title, you define the container, you make sure it's responsive on different screen size, and also you want to define your swiper pagination to make it look in your theme color. That's all good. Alright, so this thing has been done. And the last thing is that for the events item, we set up the template, but we haven't defined the CSS yet. So the events item, what I'm going to do is to copy and paste in that CSS for the item itself, which is another CSS. As you can see, for the item, we want the color to be white, and also we set up the H3 title, give a bigger font size and also a font weight in the theme color. For the price of the events, we want to have a different size as well. Just make sure that you follow this through to make it look all decent. There's really no special or more tricky CSS starting code. It's just a very typical code to make it all nice and decent. Alright, so that's the events item one. So now everything has been done. We haven't been able to see it in our current project. That is because the last job is to import it. As you can see the structure of the file, every time I create a new section component, it gets imported down below. Alright, so the page, the home page, will in the end wrap up all the component, all the sections over here. So now it's going to be our events. Import from section. It must be imported from the correct place, otherwise it will be an error. And then you go back to our current position. You see that thing is on with the section title all defined correctly, and that's the data fetched correctly, the swiper has been running correctly, the bullet point has no problem, all in the same color. If you just put your mouse there, leave your mouse there without touching it, it'll move itself. This is what we call looping autoplay. Alright, those two must be used together. If you put your mouse on here, just press down your right hand key, your left hand button on your mouse, you can drag it. You just keep dragging, it'll move much faster at your own pace. Okay, if you see these things on the mobile, you can swipe it with your finger, which is really cool, right? So this thing is what we call a React swiper, which has been widely used in many modern Next.js or React.js project. I want you guys to handle it. Okay, so that's one more section we have done, which is the events. And have a look at the original one. What is the next? The next one is going to be the book a table section, which is one of the key sections in our project, because this section allows the user to make the genuine post request to our backend, and that data will be sent in the end, hopefully to some database or some server, or send a company an email, like so. But it also incurs that form validation. If you don't fill in anything, you just want to book a table, it'll pop up with that error message. And once you start to key in your name, and that message disappears. So in the following part, I'm going to show you how to build this dynamic and fully functioned, allows the user to make a post request a booking form section using Next.js. Let me show you right now. So to create a booking table, the booking section, what we're going to do is inside our section folder, create a new file called booking, where you can say a book a table. It doesn't really matter the name. I just want to make it short. TSX, enter, and then next file is going to be a new file called booking.css. So we're trying to link these two together, RFC, to make that boilerplate ready. And then we import that booking.css. So these two are linked together. And we know that this is definitely going to be a user component, because it has a huge amount of user interaction. It's basically ask a user to put in their messages, take the user's input, and then create a post request. It has to be in a user component. So we say use client. So that's all. And then we know that to handle the user's input or the input events, we have to use the use state hook to deal with that. And then after this, what I want to do is to go into our data folder over here. Ideally, it's going to be empty in the end, because we were doing the demonstration and education purpose. So what I want to do is to set up a fake or a mock booking data, like so, to show you the template of the booking message. Each booking message contains the ID and also the detail. The details is also a object inside of which we're going to have the name, the email, the phone, the date, the time, the people, and the message left from the user. Alright, so this is like an example. And what I also want to do is to inside our API to create a new folder called booking. And then inside the booking, we'll create a file called route. So that'll take responsibility of our booking routes. And think about how many routes we're going to have for this file. Firstly, we import that booking from this data, and then we're going to create and export a synchronous function, a get request, like before, like what we did in other routes. So to allow the user to see at the endpoint, we can fetch the booking data. Say for example, we change it here. Oops, I have a typo. Yeah, like so. So now if you go to localhost 3001/API/booking, you're allowed to see this booking detail, which is our example data that we set up over here. But the main job of this route is not going to be the get request. We're supposed to do the post request, because from the front end, whenever the user submit the form, the booking form, it should send a post request to the backend API, and that request should be handled over here. So what I'm going to do is to write out a post request right here, right now. Another asynchronous function, export it, which is going to be a post request, but this post request is going to take one parameter, which is the front-end request. Alright, and that request is going to be converted into a JSON. It's a synchronous function. We await that request ready, and we store that request result into our variable, and that is going to be a booking. Alright, and we want to delete one of the properties of the booking, so we use that. That's going to be from the front end. And then this is the key part. How do we update the booking array? So far we only have one, right? Whenever the user make a new post request, there's supposed to be 2 and 3, right? The way to do so is that we get the booking details from that request element. So the ID is going to be the current booking array's length plus 1. So we have one more comes in. And the details is just going to be the request body. Alright, it's going to be the booking. That's it. And then once we have the new booking object, the original booking array is going to push that into. Alright, this is like adding a new item into an array. So once it's added, we're going to return something. First, we're going to return a JSON that stringified this new item. And then we'll have to tell the header it's going to be a content type JSON with a status of 201. 201 means that it's successful. Alright, this is how you write a post request in Next.js to handle that from the front end. So all the data side is done. So this is the back end. So all the data side is done. So what we're going to do now is to handle the front end. So we're going to the booking. And the first thing I want to do is to create a local state variable like that. It's our initial state of all the information that we're going to collect from the user on this page. The name, the email, the phone, the date, the validate. Validate has been set as a property because we need to do form validation, but this validation is only useful for this front-end page component. It's not going to be stored anywhere in our database. That's why in the routes I delete this property. Alright, we don't want it to be stored in our database as a property value. It's useless at the backend. So now we're going back, and then the local state variable is going to be set to this one. Initially, all the things are going to be set as an array, but it's an empty array. Okay, and then we create a local state variable called a text because it's handling the input text, and the set text is allow the state change. Use state means that we need to set up the initial state value, which is going to be the above object. Okay, so that's the first job, and the second job is going to handle the text change and also handle the booking submission. All right, so we're going to have a couple of functions here. One is called handle text change, and it's going to be a arrow function. So whenever the user put in something new, we should handle that new text change. Right? So the next job for us to do is to create a template for this section. What I will do, I'll copy and paste in this section code and explain it to you like so. It's quite long, but it's not hard. As you can see, this is going to be a section, and with the ID of a book table, class name the same, and everything going to be wrapped inside the Bootstrap container. Quite simple. The first element I'm going to input is going to the subtitle, the section title. So I'm going to import this one. Right above, this thing has been successfully imported, and with the name of reservation and a subtitle book table. Right. So the form is going to handle the submission. So for this entire submission form, we're going to wrap it in the form element, and on submission we're going to trigger the function called handle submit booking. Alright, so at the above, below that handle text change, I'm going to write this function handle form submission. It's also going to be a arrow function. Alright, so now this part is done, and inside the form you can see we have quite a lot of rows, and that's one row, and the other one is going to be a form group which contains the text area. So inside this first row, if you look at the original project, that's the row. It contains the user's name, email, a date, time, and numbers of people going to attend, right? So that's going to be the information collection input box. So we write a lot of this input box. However, my code is not super dry. What I mean is that I repeat myself for multiple times. As you can see, this is the input, input, and input. Ideally, you should wrap this input box into a separate component and import it over here. Alright, but for education purpose, I want you to demonstrate you in detail so you can see the whole picture. I didn't wrap it up, but I want you at your own time to wrap it at a practice. Alright, into a separate component. You just inside your component folder and create a new component called input box .tsx, and then you wrap it over there. Right? See if you after wrapping it, your code is still working. Okay, but the logic behind it is that for each input, you must give the type a name. The name must match this. Alright, if the first input box is for the user to input a name, and you have defined that property name as name, and this one must be name, because the value of it is going to be the text.name, which is text. This one has been set to our initial state value at the initial stage. Name is this one. Alright, so that's how it works. And then the second one is going to be type email, name email, value text.email. Same logic. The placeholder is dynamic. It's up to you. Whatever you want to set up for the placeholder, you can do it. It doesn't really matter. Okay? I tell you the matter things. The input is the third one. The type is text, phone, text, phone. This thing you must set up with the same name. Otherwise, the code won't work. I tell you the trick. And then date, name date, value date. Time, name time, value time. Alright? And each of them, you can see, it shares the same function. On change is all going to be the handle text change function to be triggered. So what this function does, if you look at it, I'm now going to put in this function and show you how it works. First, it's going to take the parameter, which is the default events parameter. This thing comes in with the input. You don't have to set it up. And then the second thing, whenever a unchanged event occurred, this function will be changed. First, we're going to access the property target inside the events and then deconstructing it into two separate elements. One is the name, the other one is the value. Alright? The name is going to be the input name, the value is going to be the input value. That's how you get it from the events target. And then every time the user changed input element, we want to set a text to the new input. How do we do that? We do the object spread operator, which is copy the old text the user has already typed in. And then we want to find which name has been changed to what value. This is the logic. Using a square bracket to wrap the name is how you can access the property name for the JavaScript object. This is the syntax. Alright? If you are not familiar with ES6, this is how the ES6 can handle it. That's why I ask you to name the thing the same as how you set up over here. Otherwise, this trick won't work. Okay? So every time the user type in something, you need to know which part of the input name has been handled. Is it going to be the name of the name or the name of the email? Which one has changed? And you have also need to know to what value. The value is e.target.value, which is accessing this one. Okay? So this is also what we call two-way binding. The input bind the local state bind the input. Two-way binding. And every time the user type in something, we should reset the update into an empty string. That is because the validate only shows the error message. If the user starts to type in something, basically means the input starts to change, the error message should go away. Otherwise, the error message will be lived on the browser forever. Okay? So that's one thing to be done. And once you've done that, the first job is there. So what we're going to do next is that I want to put in this booking into our main page to see if it works. So booking. So I link that in. And looks like there's no error because we haven't put in the CSS yet. That's why it looks so ugly. But if I say anything, see, I can start to type. There's no problem for me to type in things. And the date, you can type in the day, month, year, or you can use the calendar button to choose. The same for the time. You can use the clock button to choose the time that you want to pop in. All right. So you can choose this one. It's all taking values. Number of people has to be a number. So you're not allowed to key in anything else. The message you can type in. Alright? So this is how you can handle the text change inside the input box using React.js. Okay, that's one thing is done. The second thing is that we're gonna do the booking submission. Whenever the user click on in the end, say for example there's a book a table button, we should make the post request to our backend API. The backend API we already wrote, which is this one, to handle that the post request. The post request is just to add one more object into our database, right? So far our database is this static data file, but in the real work, here you should send a code to your database. If you're using a MySQL, you should just create a new request to your MySQL, and that could be an update, right? You just update, that could be an update request to your MySQL to update the database. And if you're using MongoDB, you should add a new object to your MongoDB as well. So, but here, just imagine that this data file is our database. So we're just going to use the array function to push a new object into our old array and then return it as a JSON object. Okay. So, but the same logic, you're allowed to talk to the database in this code. It's not very complicated. So in the handling submission, what we're going to do, the first thing still, we're going to use a default parameter, which is the events. And also, because we are making a request to the backend, this is supposed to be an asynchronous function, right? So we use a synchronous function to define it. And the next thing we want to do is it.prevent the default, because we want to prevent the default behavior. Otherwise, your page will be reloaded. All right, this will prevent the reloading on your page. One thing done. The next thing is going to be a simple form validation. This is going to be a simple one, but in the future project, I will show you more sophisticated or professional way to do the form validation. But this one, we're just going to check if any of those information are empty array. Basically means that the user didn't enter it. We're going to set our local state variable text, only change the validate. We copy. This is called a spread operator. We copy the entire old object and only update the one you want. We update the validate property into the value of incomplete, because later on we're going to define when the validate becomes incomplete, the error message will show up and then return out of this function. The entire code will stop. Okay, this is a simple validation. If the user has put in all of this information, we should be able to handle the post request like so. So over here in the next part, we're going to handle the post request, which is going to be a try error. We try to make a post request to our localhost 3001, because my old project is 3000, our new one is running on 3001, so I changed the routes. So to localhost 3001/API/booking, we're making a post request with the header of JSON, and the body is going to be our text, because we are sending this entire text, which contains all of these value, to our backend code, right? So we're just gonna make that text stringify to JSON, so our body will be in JSON format. And during the posting process, we want to set the validation to loading, because when you talk to the backend, there's probably going to be a time consuming depending on your internet speed. At this moment, you want to set your validate to loading. Maybe you want to show user a spinning circle while you're sending this post, right? As soon as we get a result from the backend, it basically means that the post has been done. This thing will disappear, right? So what it means that we await the response. If the response comes back, we're going to set the local validate to success. And also, for this project, I leave this on, console.log success. In a real project, you don't have to use this. We're just going to delete, comment it out, right? For testing out, if you haven't read any code, you want to see it on the console, you can try it out like this, okay? And if we catch any errors, we're just going to use that validate to show that error, which is also okay, okay? So this is the logic of making that a post request to the backend. And now, down the bottom, as you can see here, how do we tell which type of state how our post request has been made? If it's successful or loading or error or incomplete. Because we have 4 different types of validate status: incomplete, loading, success, error. All right. So down here, in this part of your code, if the loading, if it's the validate has been showing loading, we should say that sending the loading messages to the user. This is going to be a spinning effect with a class name of loading. You can set it up in a CSS file. If it's incomplete, we're going to pop up with the user to an error message, ask the user to fill in the book, right? And then if it's success, we're going to say that your booking has been sent successfully. If it's error, we're going to say if it's going to be a server error, right? So for different type of validated result, we're going to show different messages to the user. This is how it works. I set up a manual validation process for this simple project, but there are more fancy ways to do so. In a future project, I will introduce more. Today, let's just treat this as a start. So whenever the user click on the book a table button, this function on submit will be triggered, and the entire code inside here will be triggered. First, it's going to be the form validation, and then it's going to be the post request to the backend, which is we set up already. Okay. So the next job is for me to put in the booking CSS. So what I'm going to do, copy and paste this in. Make sure you reset the width of it and also the color of it, error for the error message, and also you want to make the definition for the send message. They all show in different color. The error message is going to be in our theme color. The send message is going to be in a green color. The loading is going to have some bit of a spinning effect. So when the message gets sent but haven't got a response yet, we'll show the user the loading message. That's the pseudo element to define the spinning effect, right? Like so. we have that animation loading, and down here you will see that animation loading. And for the input and text area, we want to see that give them a border radius of 0 and the font size properly. This is all just going to be the proper settings for the input box. Make sure you have that right color for the placeholder as well. All of these things. So I go through them slowly so you can check it out yourself. All right. So that's what it is. Okay. So we have this part done, and what I'm going to do next is to have a bit of a try. As you can see, after I put in the CSS, this thing has been done correctly. It looks all good. I'm just going to say for example, I'm David, and I'm just going to put in the fake email and then a fake mobile phone, and then choose a date, going to be tomorrow, and I'm just going to use the current time, the number of people 4, and the message, and just type in some random letters, and let me make a book table. As you can see, a green message gets popped back that says your booking request was sent. That means that our post message, our post code is working, because only when the post request has been handled successfully, so that we'll get this one updated to success, and we'll see that green message. That means that we must get a response result, right? But if you look at the backend, this is our old backend, only have the one example booking message. If you refresh it, you can see now it comes with the second one, which is the one we have just sent, this one. If you don't believe me, you can check the information, David at Gmail, and that's the date, the message. If you look it up here, it all matched up, right? So that means that our post request has been handled successfully. Okay, so in the real work, in the real project, this part should also update. Instead of updating the array, it should update your database, and then the data should come from the database. Okay, so everything's working now, all good. And one more thing I want to test out. If we refresh this one, of course, if you refreshed it and you refresh the backend, it's supposed to go away. It's still there for now, but after a while, this thing should have gone away. And if you don't fill in anything, you just want to book a table, you can see this will not allow you to do so because you haven't filled in anything. And that is because our simple booking validation works in here. You will check your name, your email, your date and time. If any of those are empty, it will update the validated status to incomplete. And when it's incomplete, down here, incomplete, it will show this error message. Please fill in all above details in the booking table. Okay, that's how you make it work. So one homework or one practice for you to handle on your own side is to wrap up this input into a separate component. It's quite simple. You just need to define the property of the input, like the type, the name, the value, the placeholder, and also pass in the function. It's actually not much work saving, to be honest with you, because you still have to define all these properties. They are all dynamic. Even you create your own customized input, it will look very, very same as this one. That's why I didn't do so. But it's a good practice to do in that way, right? So I have done the booking section, which is one of the most important and complicated thing in this project. The next one, let's have a look. The original one. The next few sections, one is going to be the testimonial, another swiper, and also another amazing section I will introduce probably in the next session is going to be the gallery, which allow you to see all of these gallery effects. We're using a third-party library called Glightbox to achieve this. And also we will have this chef team introduction and another form for the user to contact us, and also the footer. All right, so that's the booking section so far, and we'll continue the project building.